as he walked. Those who worship the Lord, worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. If we say that we know him, but we don't keep his word, then we walk in the darkness, and the truth's not in us. If we walk in the light, we will have fellowship sweet, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from sin. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light.
Well, good morning, everyone. I saw a particular Floridian, actually a Mainer, but in Florida, name come up here, and I had to think about what I was looking at just a few days ago, and I thought I would maybe try to drag an image over and show you a little bit of the snow that was the type of situation that we worked to avoid. So I'm gonna drag this over here, and it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be the most, but hey, I'm going to put some images up here so you can just see. This is what I was. This is snow. If you're in Virginia or if you are in Florida, look at what you don't have to deal with. You don't have to deal with this at all. I mean, here, look at this image over here. This lady in the snow. This particular picture here, Orchard Park, New York. I believe they had, the last I saw, they had 77 inches, but somebody said they read a few days later, 81 historic snowfall. It says 80 inches here on this image. That is at the Bills Stadium down here in this lower corner. So, look, you don't have to deal with any of that. No, not where you live, not in Virginia, not in Florida. So, and Don saying the blizzard of 78 comes to mind here. In those days, I was, 82, 80, back up 4 years. I was a young teenager back in like 78 and 76, 77, 78. Those were some wintry winters, that's for sure. I lived in Western Pennsylvania then, over where they get this type of snow that I was showing you right on the screen here. And I will put some other pictures up here. Yeah, so here we go. Here's images. This was typical for us right here, Erie, Pennsylvania. Uh, things like this, digging out of the snows. There you go, Erie, 53 inches in 30 hours. So that's what I grew up in. So some of you are, thinking back to those days in the 70s where we had that type of snow. We're not here to talk about snow, but we are here to think about what some of you are missing out on because you've moved to the South and you don't get to have the joy of things like, running a snowblower like this poor gentleman, or having to have the fire department come dig your house out like this. You didn't have to. This particular image is back in 2017, but you didn't have to. You don't have to do any of that. You're avoiding all of that. That image there that I'm showing you, or this image here, or this image here. You're missing out. So anyway, enjoy that. Be warm for us, and just totally enjoy all that weather. We are in Matthew chapter 17 today, and we are looking at the transfiguration of Jesus. Let's jump into this and just jump in. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. So it was four of them. It was Jesus, it's important to note this right now, it was Peter, it was James, and it was John. There were four that went up. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from heaven, a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be terrified." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The disciples asked him, "Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come. They did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. Now that is a denominational group. Another way you could put this is John the Baptizer, the one who baptized people in the Jordan River. So John the Baptizer, and the reference to Elijah here given by Jesus is understood by the disciples according to this verse 13, to be John the Baptist. Now I'm going to put this into a different translation or a paraphrase and read it. I'm going to put it in the Message paraphrase, and let's take a gander at that. 6 days later, 3 of them saw that glory. Jesus, this is what Jesus had said earlier back in chapter 16, that some would not die until they saw the glory. And we talked about this yesterday. And so this is now the 6 days later, the 3 of them seeing that glory. Jesus took Peter and the brothers, James and John, led them up a high mountain. Mountains seem to be quite a motif with Jesus. His appearance changed from the inside out right before their eyes. Sunlight poured from his face. His clothes were filled with light. Then they realized that Moses and Elijah were also there in deep conversation with him. Peter broke in. Master, this is a great moment. What would you think if I built 3 memorials here on the mountain, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah? Well, he was going on like this, babbling. A light, radiant cloud enveloped them. And sounding from deep in the cloud a voice, "This is my son, marked by my love, focus of my delight. Listen to him." When the disciples heard it, they fell flat on their faces, scared to death. But Jesus came over and touched them. "Don't be afraid." When they opened their eyes and looked around, all they saw was Jesus, only Jesus. Coming down the mountain, Jesus swore them to secrecy. "Don't breathe a word of what you've seen, and after the Son of Man is raised from the dead, you're free to talk." The disciples, meanwhile, were asking questions. Why do the religion scholars say that Elijah has to come first? But Jesus answered, Elijah does come and get everything ready. I'm telling you, Elijah's already come, but they didn't know him when they saw him. They treated him like dirt the same way they're about to treat the Son of Man. That's when the disciples realized that all along he'd been talking about John the Baptizer. So here we see Eugene Peterson, I think, giving a great term of definition to John the Baptist, John the Baptizer, because some people hear John the Baptist and they think denominational group like Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, or Catholic or something like that. No, Baptist, simply meaning he was the one who baptized people in the Jordan River. What if you had been there? What if this had been your experience? What if you were taken up the mountain by Jesus to see what they saw? What would you have thought? It says in verse 2, look at the verse. Look at what it has to say. It says, there he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as the light, just dazzling. Now, it says that when they heard the voice, they fell down. Verse 6, they fell down to the ground, face first, terrified, because they were hearing this thundering voice of God, likely the same voice that Moses heard when he encountered God at the up Mount Sinai, up at the burning bush. Same voice that would have spoken to Jesus at the time of his baptism. That same voice speaking, and they are terrified. First, they see the wonder of this glorious appearance, and for us to behold Jesus, to hold on to Jesus, to see what Jesus looks like. I mean, just to contemplate, and I'm not an artist. I mean, I can mess up stick figures. That's about the extent of my artistic ability. I'm not artistically talented in the slightest. But what if you were an artist and were to try to render this? What if you were to try to paint a picture of what this may have looked like? I think even an artist's brush probably could not capture the glorious nature of the transfiguration. They might come close. They might give some vestige of what the transfiguration may have looked like. But for us to hold on to Jesus and to see his face, to think of this face shining like the brilliance of the sun, to think of his clothes becoming as white as the light. Oh, that we would want to hold on to Jesus. Oh, that we'd want to see him as he is, that we would long for him in that kind of way. How did they know it was Moses and Elijah? That's a question that I have. Moses and Elijah, perhaps two of the most famous of the Old Testament era. Moses, in many ways, uh, the great lawgiver, not in many ways, he was the great lawgiver. I was going to say the father of Israel, but really, father of Israel is Abraham. But Moses could be looked at in this type of a way, being glorious and being his face shining as it did. It speaks in the Old Testament that as Moses went up and spent time with God and came back down, his face just simply radiated. There was this glow about Moses' face. Speaks of that in the Old Testament. And Elijah, we know, was taken up to heaven in the whirlwind, just snatched right before the presence of Elisha. And Elisha got to see him go. Two of the more famous, and these two will be the two that will appear again in the book of Revelation. We're told these great prophets that they believe will be Moses and Elijah that will come during the time of the tribulational period. But how did they know that this was Moses and Elijah? I mean, you look at verse 4, and it says, Peter said, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He just wanted to stay there. Now, Peterson talked about memorials. I think shelters is a more accurate term here. I think it gets more to the matter of what's going on. Moses is saying, in effect, hey, let's stay here. There's such splendor here, such radiance here, such glory here. Let's simply stay here. Lord, it is good for us to be here. I mean, could we say that? Where are you, or where have you been in your spiritual life where you could say it is good for us to be here, where you just do not want to leave, where you just want to be there in the presence of God? Oh, that we would pray that our churches would be places where we wouldn't want to leave, that, we would just want to linger longer because the presence of God is there and the presence of God is sweet. Longing to be there. Lord, it is good for us to be here. And if you wish, he says, I'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Now talking about these shelters for just a moment, I just want to make mention of the fact that, I mean, they had their various feasts. That we had one back here in October, the Feast of Booths, it was called, and or the Feast of Tabernacles. The people would literally have tents that they would come to Jerusalem and stay out in their tents to remind them of their sojourn in the desert during that 40 years of time. The Feast of Tents, the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles. And in fact, the Apostle Paul, when he says he made tents, most likely made these types of tents, these what we would now make a pop-up shelter that would stay up. And just think of how you could get something like that at EMS, Eastern Mediterranean Sports, and the tents that they would make, or REI type of thing, or LLB. You get what I'm saying. I mean, the way that tents they make them so quick, you can set them up in 30 seconds, take them down in 2 minutes. So on and so forth. And I think that Peter had even something a little bit more elaborate than that, something that they could build that would be sturdy, that they could just stay there. And the 3 tents, these tents that Peter's speaking of for Jesus, for Moses, for Elijah, and probably they'd say, hey, I'll make a couple for us too, so that we can stay in. Let's just stay here. Well, it would be my prayer that we would be in a place where we'd be having the experiences of being in a place where we just don't want to go home, where our fellowship is so sweet, where our worship is so sweet, where the presence of God is so sweet and so obvious that we just want to linger. Friends, I think we should pray and desire and work toward those types of experiences. Now, we can't make the presence of God be there, but what we can do is we can make ourselves ready to receive the presence of God. We can make ourselves ready to God would be pleased to dwell among us. That's what I'm trying to say. That we would long to be there. But notice, they didn't linger. What did they do? They had to leave. They fell face down on the ground, it says. Sense of awe came over them. When is the last time? When have you ever, in fact? Or when is the last time that you were so impressed, so overwhelmed with the sense of the presence of God, with the sense of the nearness of God, with the sense of the holiness of God, that you fell down on your faces before God? Or that I fell on my face before God. Notice what it says in verse 6. When the disciples heard these words, "This is my son whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." When they heard this word from the cloud, they fell face down, terrified. Now, certainly, I would like to think that if we had that type of encounter, that we would fall face down on the ground ourselves, that we would want to worship in this way ourselves if we had this type of experience. I've had these experiences along the way in my Christian experience where I want to get down on the ground before God. I'm overwhelmed by his presence. And friends, this should not be such an abnormal thing. I talk about these things, and sometimes I have some Baptist people, and I'm talking Baptist denominational, or even others, it doesn't have to be limited to Baptist, who look at me like I have two heads. You did what? We should fall down on our faces before God? Absolutely. It says it. They fell face down before the Lord, terrified. That we would learn to lay ourselves out before God, to prostrate ourselves before God, to lay before him. This is what I'm speaking of, is to just lay on the floor before God. Maybe today you would be impressed. Maybe today you would say, you know what, I'm going to try this. I'm going to get my Bible out, or I'm going to put on worship music, and I'm going to lie down on my floor, and I'm going to worship God. Now, hopefully your floor is clean. Hopefully your floor has some carpeting on it or something like that would be helpful to you. But where you just say, I'm going to choose to get before God in this way. They fell down. They heard the voice. They saw the glorious splendor of Christ. That we would see the glorious splendor of Christ in our eyes of faith. That we would hear the voice of God, the voice of the Spirit speaking into our souls so deeply, so keenly, so obvious, that we would just choose to fall before him. I believe, friends, that if we would choose, even without seeing the glory like they saw here in Matthew chapter 7, if we would lay down on the floor, or lie down, proper English, lie down on the floor before the Lord, and humble ourselves before the Lord, oh, what things might he do in our lives as a result of that type of humility. But they didn't get to linger. They had to move on. It says to us, Jesus, verse 7, Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said, don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Now, the other thing I want to bring out from this passage is they had to come down from the mountain. They couldn't just stay there. Yes, they were having a glorious encounter, but they couldn't simply stay. They had to go back down because there was ministry to do. While we might want to sit there in the presence of Jesus in such a wonderful, glorious time, we are called to go back down the mountain. We're called to take the message back. We're called to go finish the work. So, two things: go up the mountain, encounter God, humble yourself before him, lie out on the floor before God, cry out to God, worship God, listen to worship music, let it wash over you. whatever it takes. And Walter's saying, I've experienced that feeling many times worshiping with others at Calvary Church down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Walter also saying the story of many of the old hymns bring me to that point. And I could say there are new songs as well that can bring me. There's a handful of songs, and I can't remember off the top of my head what they are right now, that just they grab my soul and make me want to worship in that type of a way. But friends, we can't stay on the mountain. Yes, we should get in the presence of Jesus. Yes, we should get where we can hear the voice of the Father speaking into our hearts. Yes, we should worship. Yes, we should bow down. Yes, we should fear. Yes, we should reverence. But then we are called to go back down the mountain. He took them down the mountain because they had work that they had to do. And friends, you and I are called to go down the mountain as well. First thing, get before God. Second thing, go and proclaim God. Go and proclaim Christ. Go and proclaim the message to others. Tell others of your encounter. Tell others of your experience. He told them that after his resurrection, they could speak of these things. Well, friends, you and I are in a place where we can have this rich encounter that we can tell others about, or where we've had the rich encounter that we can tell others about. Would you be so moved to tell people about your encounter with Jesus? Whether it's that first encounter like I had at age 15 so many years ago, or that you would tell them of an encounter that you had more recently. My prayer for you, my prayer for me is that we would experience the wonder of Christ. My prayer for you and my prayer for me is that we wouldn't just read over a passage like that, see the words in black and white, or even red and white if you have the red letter edition, but that we might desire to ponder this scene, that we too might see Jesus. But then to go back down. To go right back down into the throes of ministry. And in fact, we're going to pick up here tomorrow, but I want you to see that the very next thing. Verse 14, when they came to a crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. So they as soon as they get down off the mountain, there is a crowd. As soon as they come down, there's ministry to be done. And friends, we need to go get in the presence of Jesus, but then we need to come back to where the ministry needs to be done. Yes, tell people about the wonder. Help others to lift up Jesus, to behold Jesus, to see Jesus in this glorious way. If we're going to help others to have that experience, we've got to go to others. We have to go back down to where the people are. Yes, we would just want to linger there. Yes, we just want to stay there, but we've got work to do. Work to do all around us. And it's my prayer that you and I will be moved by the power of God, that we'd be moved by the splendor of Christ, that we'd be moved by the wonder of our salvation experience, that we'd be moved in obedience to the Great Commission to make Jesus known to the world around us. Well, friends, I'm going to stop there for this morning. I hope that you have a day that maybe even this next half hour, if you have the time, that maybe you'd go, don't lie down on your bed, because you know what will happen. You'll snore. But if you lie down on your floor, now maybe you're not physically able to do that, but to get yourself in a place, maybe get a playlist on YouTube pulled up of worship music that just gets to your soul, and sit there for an extra 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and worship God and be caught in the wonder of Christ. Lord, help us today to desire you so fully, to encounter you so richly, that we can't help but bow before you. And then we can't help but tell others about you. Lord, in our lives, be glorified as our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Friends, that's a wrap for today. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.